Okay. Hopefully now the stream should work. Okay. Dad, what are you doing? Alright, YouTube. So I think we're about to be joining. We're about to be going live. I think we are live. Are we live? Okay. I just need to modify the stream. Alright, yeah. So we are getting major breaking news. Canada is holding an emergency debate in Parliament amid the crisis in the Middle East. We are going to join that in just a few seconds. Alright, wait. May as well get a proper intro for this. Breaking news, breaking news. There is about to be an emergency debate held in Canada Parliament. Actually, I believe it is already underway, but we are about to join the live. We're going to tune in to the live stream together and find out what's going on in Parliament. So I just need to, Alright. So we're about to go live. Or we're about to look. See, we just lost our source. Parlview. Alright. Uh-oh. I just shrink the window. Alright. Let's tune in.
And is it normal that all of a sudden the government comes out in favor of the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran? With no conditions. Is it then normal to see the Prime Minister shifting his position? Suddenly he cared about international law. Then he said that Canada would not become involved in the conflict. Then he said that maybe Canada would become involved in the conflict depending on the conditions. Just today, the government has seemed to undergo a late in the day conversion. He's saying that Canada was not consulted and never expressed agreement with these strikes. It's not just us who are interested in the government's position. Canada is a NATO country and a G7 country. I'm sure lots of people had some questions about what the government had to say. Now, the Prime Minister is going crisscrossing the world to sign trade agreements, or not trade agreements, but vague agreements. Nothing in those agreements will change the economic realities of Canada or Quebec in the next few years. Not consulted, never expressed. It seems that the government is taking the same approach on the Iran issue. He announces military spending without being able to put his money where his mouth is. Canada will not be a major military power anytime soon. In Davos, the Prime Minister spoke about cooperation between middle powers. 2 days later, he came to an agreement with the Middle Kingdom.
What is that?
Did he talk to China about middle powers? It seems that the Prime Minister's position is a very confused one. Look at the effects of the Prime Minister's leadership here in Quebec and Canada. Look at the effects of the war. The war will change lives here. We have people who are struggling given the tariff crisis and who have been struggling for a year now. We have a trade war so serious that we freak out when the President of the United States even picks up the phone when the Prime Minister calls. That makes headlines these days. We have the threat of a recession on the horizon. And now, today, the price of a barrel of oil has skyrocketed, leading to obvious short-term inflation that could lead us right into a recession. The effects of the war are significant. Purchasing power for the most vulnerable will decline. Interest rates will go up. People will lose their jobs, lose access to home ownership. These are the threats we are facing. And we have seen short-term government interventions to preserve purchasing power, for example, purchasing power of seniors. We've seen efforts to inure Canada against trade wars. We've seen efforts to increase productivity, all short-term efforts. We are dealing with another monstrous deficit, and nothing can prevent this. Deficits seem to be the trademark of this Liberal government. Deficits without measures that truly support people.
If this war continues and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, as a result, will continue, and this will complicate things for Canada, and once again, it will be the most vulnerable who will pay the price. So I call on the Prime Minister to have a clear plan to take care of our people, of the people. So Canada is waiting to hear what he has to say. Same applies to Quebec. But the Prime Minister has to do three things: restart the negotiations on the tariffs and the trade relationship, deploy short-term measures to meet the needs of people in our economy, and stay steadfast and collaborate with other middle powers to save a maximum number of human lives. Human lives are at stake because this is a war and not a TV show. And in war, Mr. Speaker, people die. Thank you. Questions and comments?
When if Pierre is going to step up to the plate.
Member for, okay, Cowichan, Malahat, Langford. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 100,000 Canadians are caught in the growing crisis in the Middle East, and they deserve more than vague assurances and than last-minute contingency planning. As the threat from the Iranian regime escalated, the government says it deployed consular staff, updated travel advisories, and explored possible airspace access. Those are preparatory steps, but Canadians in the region need action. In past times of war and crisis, Canadian government has organized emergency support and assisted departures such as Haiti in 2024 and Oplumen in support of potential evacuations in Lebanon in 2023. To date, Canada's response for the Iranian crisis is still reactive instead of proactive. When warning signs of impending crisis have been visible for months, plans and preparations should have already been in place. My question, does the leader of the Bloc Québécois agree with my call for the government to work with allies and regional partners to secure safe departure operations without delay, to ensure that military personnel, aircraft and consular resources needed are in place to support the thousands of Canadians caught in the Middle East and over 3,500 Canadians looking for extraction, including inside Iran? Thank you.
Let's try and keep the questions and answers fairly succinct. L'Honorable.
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, hopefully they're not expecting me to repeat the same elements. My answer will be shorter than the question, Mr. Speaker. The primary function of a state is, as I mentioned before, is to take care of its people, protect its people. It's not just 106,000 Canadians and others who have asked to be taken out of this region. There are others as well, but there has been no answer. I mean, it's longer than changing one's internet subscription. There's no end to this thing. And one thing we can observe is that this government is not able realizing what the situation is on the ground, what the real threats are facing real people. The honourable member for La Salle, Aymar Verdun. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the Bloc Québécois talked about taking care of people, and we're assuming he's talking about Canadians in general.
All right, everybody, I'm going to be right back for a bit.
But as the price of oil is going up, energy prices are going up, we have big projects in Canada. For instance, the agreement we have with Alberta, and we've been hearing about some rumors around liquefied natural gas potentially in Quebec. I would like to know what the position of the leader of the opposition is when it comes to developing energy projects so that we can bring these prices down in Canada and also put more money into the pockets of Canadians so that we can also support social programs. Mr. Speaker, I understand that we talk about pipelines and gas lines here, but the last time Canada wanted to build one, it took 14 years. We have a war going on in Iran right now, so hopefully we'll be a bit more optimistic as to the end of this ongoing war. Now, after having lost a significant chunk of our electricity grid, if you will, to go to waste, they will be having a good laugh as they're driving by a gas station.
L'Honorable.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my leader delivered a great speech, as per usual. He referred to Davos, and everyone remembers the Prime Minister's speech at Davos, despite the fact that he was in the United Arab Emirates and Beijing 3 days prior. So my question is the following. How does he think that middle powers received the first speech of the Prime Minister when it comes to the U.S. and Israeli attack? How does he think that this was received and perceived by our allies, Australian allies, for instance? Thank you. Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, we can't have people who are not here. We cannot speak on behalf of people who are not here. Diplomacy requires discretion. But let's ask the question of what's being said in diplomacy circles. When the Prime Minister says that military interventions need to be sanctioned by the United Nations and abide by international law, and then at the first opportunity he shows up and freestyles and supports the position of the American president, then I don't think people will think too highly of that position. It's troubling, and I'm convinced that international diplomacy has seen the incoherence in all of this.
La députée de Saanich-Goldfarb-Linz.
Merci à mon collègue, chef de bloc.
I would like to thank my colleague, the leader of the Bloc Québécois, for his speech. Now I'm going to quote from the President of the United States, who said that when a crazy person has nuclear weapons, bad things happen. So my question to my colleague, my dear colleague, is the following. Does he think, or what does he think the President sees when he looks in the mirror? The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, other than the rhetorical aspect of what we're doing here, I wouldn't rise in Parliament and say that the President of the United States is a crazy person, but I think that the craziness in running after nuclear weapons applies to all weapons. And here in the U.S., anywhere else, using violence and wishing death upon someone is the definition of crazy. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent, Makiawana. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the leader of the bloc for his speech, really well laid out and inspiring. Although at some points I've not really agreed with the leader of the Bloc Québécois. So he has shown that Davos is not the House of Commons and House of Commons is not Davos. Everyone makes their own choices. But the question is the following. He talked about the fact that the Prime Minister seems to have changed his mind on a couple of occasions. What does he think that this has, what the impact of this is on our relationship with our allies in Asia, but elsewhere as well? Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, I am concerned. It's not that easy to explain, but it is as if in a crisis context we shouldn't be questioning what the Prime Minister says and then goes on to change his opinion, but it's the responsibility of parliamentarians to do that. The Prime Minister has delivered some speeches which were important to him and conveyed his positions, but we haven't seen concrete steps after these positions. And after the honeymoon, maybe these recent months or upcoming months will be a bit harder. Now, that's a bit risky for his party, but the main issue is that it's risky for the well-being and the economy of the entirety of the population of Quebec and Canada. And I am as enthusiastically not in agreement with him sometimes, but a gentleman remains a gentleman. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to come back on the current position of the Conservatives who are supporting the Israeli and American assault. This assault seems to be in violation of international law. They seem to be aiming regime change. So this attack violates international law and goes after regime change. So the Conservatives, are they not telling Vladimir Putin, well, what you're doing is okay? The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, this is a fundamental question. Questioning multilateral institutions through which the world countries talk to each other, and these, of course, were created in the aftermath of the Second World War as protective measures to keep the world from launching into armed conflict. It's quite risky to violate the principles and the existence of these institutions. Now, a couple months ago, President Trump again intervened in Iran, and no one really criticized him that much, maybe not even ourselves. But he has done the same thing again. He hasn't consulted anyone, and he hasn't relied on these institutions at all. Resuming debate.
Le ministre de la Défense nationale.
Président, les événements
Mr. Speaker, the events taking place in the Middle East are taking place in an interconnected world, and no conflict is far away, and no nation is safe from the repercussions of what's happening.
Middle East extend far beyond the region itself. The past weeks have brought a stark reminder of this reality. Military operations, retaliatory strikes, and the threat of escalation have sent waves of concern across the globe. As our Prime Minister noted in Sydney, the world's focus must remain on restraint, on preventing further escalation, and on ensuring that the Iranian regime does not acquire nuclear capabilities. At the same time, the hopes and aspirations of the Iranian people for freedom, dignity, and self-determination must not be ignored. Canada has a direct stake in what happens in that region. The Middle East lies at the heart of global trade, energy flows, and international security. Instability there reverberates around the world, touching economies, alliances, and the lives of Canadians, both at home and abroad. For decades, the Iranian regime has sown instability, and deliberately so, through support for militant proxies, armed groups, and terrorist organizations, and through its pursuit of nuclear capabilities. The regime has threatened its neighbors and undermined the security of the international community. Recently, the United States and Israel conducted coordinated military strikes targeting elements of Iran's leadership and military infrastructure. Canada was not consulted, Canada did not participate, and Canada has no plans to participate in these offensive operations. Le Canada n'a pas été consulté.
Canada was not consulted with regard to the offensive operations against Iran, and Canada did not participate in these operations and has no intention of doing so.
Canada was not consulted, did not participate, and has no plans to participate in these operations. Our focus is clear: the immediate de-escalation of hostilities, the protection of civilians, and the prevention of further conflict. Few will mourn the weakening of a regime that has oppressed its own people and destabilized an entire region. Canada stands with the Iranian people who seek a future defined not by fear or repression, but by freedom and the ability to chart their very own path. At the same time, we recognize that conflict carries consequences far beyond its origin. Gulf states and other regional partners, including Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, have borne significant consequences from attacks on their civilian infrastructure and essential services.
Canada attaches a great importance to this partnership and continues to work in close collaboration with these countries, as well as with its G7 allies, in order to de-escalate and favor diplomatic solutions.
Be unequivocal when it comes to our Canadian Armed Forces on the ground. All Canadian Armed Forces personnel in the region are safe and accounted for. The Canadian Armed Forces continuously assesses threats, adjusts its posture, and enhances protective measures to ensure the safety of personnel while maintaining effectiveness. Au besoin, des ajustements sont apportés.
When there are needs, adjustments are made quickly and decisively. The protection of our forces is the absolute priority.
Is the highest priority. The nature of modern conflict extends beyond conventional operations. Cyber threats now form a critical dimension of national and international security. The Communications Security Establishment, together with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, stands on Canada's digital front lines, protecting government networks, critical infrastructure, and Canadians from malicious activity. Following recent developments in the Middle East, Canadian authorities have assessed the potential for Iranian-linked cyber activity. Threats could target critical infrastructure, attempt influence operations, or harass our military personnel, diaspora communities, and activists. In response, guidance has been issued to organizations across the country to remain vigilant and to protect their systems. Cyber capabilities are also integral to supporting Canadian military operations abroad. The Communications Security Establishment can provide intelligence, situational awareness, and active cyber protection to ensure the safety of deployed personnel. Legal authorities allow Canada to respond to foreign threats in a measured, lawful, and proportionate manner, consistent with our democratic values. Canada continues to invest in its cyber and defence capabilities. Modern secure communications, resilient networks, and advanced defence systems strengthen our ability to act decisively, protect our personnel, and operate alongside allies with greater confidence. Ces investissements permettent au Canada.
These investments enable Canada to address the challenges posed by an ever-changing and increasing complex threat environment.
What defines Canada's response in moments of international crisis like this is principle. First, act responsibly. We do not join conflicts without consultation or request. Second, protect Canadians. All personnel deployed abroad and citizens in affected regions remain our very highest priority. Third, support our partners. Those enduring consequences of conflict they did not choose deserve our solidarity. Fourth, promote stability. Through diplomacy, engagement, and adherence to international law, Canada has long maintained that global security is best preserved through cooperation, restraint, and respect for international norms. These principles guide our actions today. The Middle East faces a period of profound uncertainty, but also of possibility. The weakening of an oppressive regime opens the door to a different future, a better future, one shaped not by violence or proxy wars, but by the aspirations of the Iranian people for dignity, security, and self-determination. We will continue to focus our efforts on protecting Canadians in the region, and we will work with partners to de-escalate this conflict. We will continue defending democratic principles, human rights, and international law. Nous continuerons
We will continue to act responsibly, protecting our people and contributing to the stability of a world too often disrupted by conflict.
In moments such as these, Mr. Speaker, colleagues, the choices we make define the values we uphold. Canada chooses responsibility. Canada chooses courage. Canada chooses the protection of human life, the support of partners, and the promotion of peace. Canada chooses de-escalation. And in doing so, Canada continues its unwavering commitment to a more secure, stable, and just world. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake Eastern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to add my voice to those of other Conservatives, including the Leader of the Official Opposition, who has said that our support for the people of Iran is clear and unwavering. They deserve to have a peaceful government, democratically elected, and that's why we support the removal of the terrorist regime in Iran. And I just again have to reiterate that we can never forget all the illegal terrorist activities, the state-sponsored terrorism throughout the region that the Iranian regime has conducted, not just in the last few years, but over the last 44 years. And never forget that when they shot down Ukrainian Airlines flight PS-752, that killed. That was a murdering of 55 Canadians and 30 permanent residents. And we know that Iran is a major supporter of Russia in what they have done in Ukraine with the Shahed drones and the lessons that I've learned there. Now, the minister talked about making sure there's consultations and about ongoing conflicts. It has been the part of this House to actually pronounce itself with a vote on whether or not we ever deploy troops. Can he guarantee that there will be a vote in this House if the government decides to deploy Canadian Armed Forces members and our kit in support of the operations against the Iranian regime?
Honourable Minister of National Defence.
I thank my colleague, Mr. Speaker, for his question. I thank him for his concern for the situation. He and I share and stand, I think, on the same ground. But I think I've made it very clear. Canada has no intention whatsoever in entering into this prosecution of a war led by Israel and the United States. Canada was not consulted. Canada did not advise. Canada does not have personnel actively engaged in this conflict. And that's very clear for this government, Mr. Speaker. We are going to use our best efforts first to have Canadians who are in the region removed. We've made sure that our military personnel are in safe locations, away from harm. And the third thing I would say is we're going to make sure that we can work with other like-minded parties to de-escalate this situation, which appears to be actually spiraling out of control.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe Bagot Acton. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister, first of all, well, he talked about it in his speech. Where is Canada's official position now? And I understand that when a situation evolves, one must adapt, but in so little time, why have we gotten so many contradictory messages from the government? I know there's an emergency plan now, but while everyone was getting ready, why was no emergency plan being prepared by Canada with regards to consular services?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister for National Defence. I think that, Mr. Speaker, I described Canada's position very well. The Prime Minister was very clear in his comments, in his most recent comments, in fact, with regards to preparations to help Canadians in the region. This began straight away when the attacks from Israel and the States began. We have people here and in the region to help Canadians exfiltrate from the area. There are tens of thousands of Canadians there. We have facilitated air travel. We have booked blocks on planes, and we continue to help people leave the region. We have many retirees, many people that work in the region, that live in the region, and so Canada's position is clear. Our focus is on the protection of Canadians if they need it, the protection of our military forces, and third of all, we want to help with negotiations to de-escalate the situation.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Natural Resources. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like the Minister for Defence to transmit the gratitude of all Canadians to the members of the armed forces for the work that they do every day. General Carignan said, and the Prime Minister was very clear, that it's possible that troops might be involved at some point, but we will not be part of offensive strikes. General Carignan said that they were working on a whole series of eventualities. Can the Minister of Defence explain how the armed forces could be called to participate in situations like this one? Is it through evacuations? Is it through escorting ships, oil tankers, for example? What can the Canadian Armed Forces do in such a situation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Minister for National Defence. The Canadian Armed Forces are always prepared. They are always observing what's happening in the world, watching geopolitical shifts, and after the attacks against Iran, the Canadian Armed Forces have started working. It's always possible to help countries, especially in the Middle East. We might help countries that need help with their desalination plants, for example, their electricity plants as well. There are always ways where we can help. There's also help that could be provided by CSEC, which works in intelligence. We are listening, but now our priorities are Canadians, our armed forces, and, of course, we are trying to aspire towards a de-escalation of this war.
Other questions and comments? Alderman for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, in the last exchange, the minister said that they are going to put in, are considering any participation from the standpoint of military in the region. But at the same time, the Prime Minister said in one of his questions last week that one can never categorically rule out participation. As we know, the Chief of Defence Staff has also said that they're looking at what they could do. So again, historically, we have actually brought to this House motions and votes on whether or not there's going to be any deployment of Canadian Armed Forces. And whether those forces are going to be used in supporting those that are already in the region, or we're going to be supporting Gulf states or other allies in the war against the Iranian regime. We had Afghanistan 2006 and 2008. We had votes in the House. In Libya in 2011. Iraq and Syria, the war against ISIS, we had votes here. Even under Justin Trudeau, we had on the Iraq-Syria war a vote in 2016. So will the minister guarantee that there will be a vote before we send any Canadian Armed Forces into the region to assist our allies? And will he also address the issue on whether or not the 244 troops that are currently in the region that are in Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Egypt, and in the Golan Heights, that they are safe, and are they armed up, able to protect themselves, or are they just sheltering in place?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Well, the first thing I would remind the members is the difference between offensive and defensive activities. And right now, I've made it very clear, the government is not going to be pursuing offensive activities. This is not something that we're contemplating. It's not something that we've been requested to do. We have not been approached by the prosecutors of this war, Israel or the United States, and we have no intention of following up on that front. We're going to focus on de-escalation efforts. It isn't helpful in my mind right now to gin up the volume around this conflict on any side of the House. Canadians are worried enough right now. We have enough family members, enough Canadians in the region. What we should be doing is letting cooler heads prevail, Mr. Speaker, and I think we should be assisting neighboring states, if it's requested, with civil matters, water systems, desalination plants, electricity, and other challenges that these regions and these countries, forgive me, in this region are facing. So it's not a simple matter, and the member knows this. We're not talking about the prosecution of war in this country today. We're talking about trying to get things to de-escalate so we can find a successful outcome.
Je rappelle au règlement.
A point of order, the member for Louis Saint-Laurent-Aqua-Wanrac.
To Standing Order 43-2A, I hereby divide all Conservative caucus slot in two.
So noted. Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires.
We have time for a short question. The Honourable Member for Shefford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for his speech. And I know that he is very interested by the United Nations. We've been there a few times together. I would like to hear on him on the fact that the majority of UN Security Council members have raised significant concerns and have immediately called for a de-escalation of the situation, have called for diplomatic negotiations. The Secretary General is worried about the whole region going up in flames. What does my honourable colleague have to say? The Honourable Minister, I believe that we have to take what is said at the United Nations seriously, but we also have to admit that there is an issue with the United Nations. I used to work at the United Nations, and there's a problem at the Council. The United Nations doesn't seem to work. There are conflicts over the last 10 years that have not been solved through the United Nations or through the United Nations Security Council. So there is work to do to re-establish this multilateral organization, and I believe that there is progress to be achieved. However, unfortunately, I must interrupt the Minister. Resuming debate.
Halton Hills North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's position on the war in the Middle East has been contradictory and incoherent. And I think, Mr. Speaker, when I say that, I'm being generous in my criticism. The Prime Minister and the government have said multiple times that they support U.S. airstrikes against Iran to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent Iran's regime from further threatening international peace and security. When the U.S. airstrikes began on Saturday, February 28, 2026, the government issued a formal statement issued jointly in the names of the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, which can be found, if the public is interested, on the PMO's website. And it states unequivocally, and I quote, "Canada supports the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace and security," end quote. In other words, the government unequivocally supports the U.S. airstrikes against Iran. Clear, unambiguous, coherent, and consistent. But then several days passed. Some Liberals became uneasy with the Prime Minister's clear, unambiguous, coherent, and consistent statement. So the government started to backtrack ambiguously, incoherently, and inconsistently. On March 3rd, the Prime Minister said, with respect to his support for the airstrikes, that he took the position with regret. Here's exactly what he said, quote, "We take this position with regret because the current conflict is another example of the failure of the international order. Despite decades of the United Nations Security Council resolutions, the tireless work of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and a succession of sanctions and diplomatic frameworks, Iran's nuclear threat remains," end quote. In other words, the Prime Minister took the position in support of the airstrikes with regret, and the current conflict is an example of the failure of the international order, including diplomatic frameworks. On the same day, the Defense Minister came out and called for a diplomatic end to the U.S. airstrikes, and that the government would prefer to see a ceasefire of the U.S. airstrikes. Here's what the Defense Minister said on the very same day the Prime Minister issued the previous statement, and I quote, "We're also calling for a diplomatic end to it. We very much would prefer to see peace and a ceasefire," end quote. In other words, the government on the same day said diplomacy has failed, but we are calling for more diplomacy. It said we support the U.S. airstrikes, but we regret supporting the U.S. airstrikes. Does the government support the airstrikes, or is it calling for a ceasefire? It's not clear. Which is it? And then on March 4th, the Prime Minister said this about the U.S. airstrikes: "Canada's policy itself," and I'm quoting, quote, "Canada's policy itself is to always and everywhere respect international law," end quote. He then further said, quote, "Canada reaffirms that international law binds all belligerents," end quote. And the Foreign Minister tonight in the House said, and I quote, "International law binds all parties," end quote. But at the same time, on March 4th, the Prime Minister said about the airstrikes that they appear inconsistent with international law. He said, and I quote, "Prima facie, it appears that these actions are inconsistent with international law," end quote. But the Prime Minister has said multiple times, as has the government, that it consistently supports the airstrikes. So does it see the airstrikes as inconsistent with international law, but supports them anyway, while its policy is to call on Canada and the United States and all international parties to always and everywhere, all the time, support international law? This is completely contradictory and inconsistent. So to summarize, here is the government's position on the conflict in the Middle East. We support the U.S. acting with airstrikes, but we also regret having to support the U.S. in airstrikes. We call for a ceasefire of the airstrikes, but we call for the airstrikes to continue. The international order and diplomacy has failed, but we're calling for more diplomacy. We call on all parties, including Canada and the United States, to uphold international law, but we believe the airstrikes are inconsistent with international law, but we support them. Mr. Speaker, the government's foreign policy is a complete, incoherent mess.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Jean.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his intervention. There are a number of things that are interesting this evening indeed. I fully agree with him that the Liberal flip-flopping has led to a lot of confusion, which is undignified from the party in power. We haven't heard anything from the NDP this evening. I don't think that we will be hearing from them this evening, even though they had a press conference asking for an emergency debate, which is rather peculiar. The Conservatives, however, have a clear position, but that doesn't mean that it's a coherent one. What I'm asking of my colleague is the following. When the leader of the official opposition said that he was proud of his Prime Minister, when the Prime Minister blindly supported Donald Trump's attack, does he not realize that Donald Trump said that the next leader of Iran? I would like to allow the Honourable Member to respond.
Merci.
Thank you for that statement. More than anything, I appreciate his intervention. Our position is clear. The Iranian regime is a threat to Canadians. It's a threat to the international system, international order, and the peace and security of the Middle East. And that is the reason for which we have been, for a long time now, we have been against, rather, Tehran's regime. And we are pleased that the regime can no longer threaten our country as it did before.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for an excellent speech highlighting the gross inconsistencies in the government's position. And my goodness, on a debate so important, you would think that more members of the government would actually be willing to show up and listen and participate in that conversation. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the member to comment on the use of Shahed drones as part of the invasion of Ukraine and the close relationship between the regime in Tehran and the Putin regime. We see a collaboration among belligerents, among dictators, and I know people in the Ukrainian community as well as the Iranian community want to see an end to this regime and an end to the support that it's been offering Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine.
Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank my honourable colleague for the question, because it points out that Ukraine, which we all support in this House, was unequivocal and clear and unambiguous in its support for the U.S. airstrikes against Iran, because Ukraine, like few democracies, understands firsthand that this is a fight between Western liberal democracies and authoritarian states. And Ukraine is on the front lines of that fight and has been subject to the Shahed drones that Iran has been providing Russia that have attacked Ukrainians in their communities thousands of times over the last 4 years, leading to thousands, if not tens of thousands of deaths. That Iran and Russia are in this together, along with the People's Republic of China, an increasing rising authoritarianism that threatens not only democracies like Ukraine, but threatens democracies on the other side of the Atlantic, like here in Canada.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte-Acton. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think anyone in this House could be accused of sympathizing with the regime, but let's talk about threats. In the Obama era, there was an agreement that reined back the nuclear threat of Iran. Things were going well, and then Donald Trump destroyed the agreement. Back in the day, the Iranian regime was losing ground. People were turning their back on it. Then it found support. Now we see that there are American airstrikes which risk radicalizing a new generation again. The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills North. Thank you for that question. I think that the Iranian threat within the framework of nuclear threats is a real one. We have obtained information indicating that Iran had obtained 400 kilograms of nuclear material with a 60% purity. I do have to interrupt the members so we can continue with the debate.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Heritage.
It has been a war of our medieval rivals over the civilization we've built, Mr. Speaker, a war born of post-war and Cold War anti-colonial uprisings, of communism's fall in the Soviet Union, now reanimated from Beijing today, a war for nearly a half-century cast in modern technologies in the globalized economy we built, in the moral equivalencies we have fallen to. I rise having just returned from Abu Dhabi, where the closing chapter of this regime began to unfold before my very eyes. As I watched Emirati inceptors engage Iranian ballistic missiles overhead, missiles and drones enabled by Beijing's technology, I was taken back 20 years ago to when I was in Iraq, watching Iranian Katyusha rockets falling over Baghdad. Today, in response to more than 1,000 missiles and drones, the Emiratis defend their country with extraordinary precision. Their systems worked. Their people were protected. But why does this regime attack Abu Dhabi and Dubai with such aggression? Because these shining cities represent everything the Iranian regime fears. While the Middle East has moved forward toward prosperity and opportunity, Tehran remains trapped in their same dark obsessions. For 20 years, I have warned about this regime. In Iraq, I have worked with Iranian dissidents. For that, Tehran branded me a terrorist. Later, as an advisor to Prime Minister Harper and Minister John Baird, I helped close the Iranian embassy in Ottawa, strengthen nuclear inspections, provide political space to millions of Iranians to speak freely. Mr. Speaker, after 47 years of the Islamic Republic and 37 under Ali Khamenei, the record is damning. This is the regime that stormed the American embassy and took diplomats hostage, while brave Canadians helped some escape. It is obsessed with destroying Israel, pioneered roadside bombs, built an empire of proxy militias, sustained Bashar al-Assad's butchery over his own people, and brutalized their own citizens under women life freedom. In recent weeks, it has massacred tens of thousands of Iranians, all while racing toward nuclear weapons. And who helped fuel this final sprint? The Kremlin and the Middle Kingdom saw their partner in the clerical military dictatorship. Russia and China want a new age of empires. They have been afforded the West's best intentions. The G7 expanded to include Russia, creating the G8, and NATO established confidence measures and the Russia-NATO Council. China was granted most favored trading status, a seat at the World Trade Organization, and prominence in multilateral organizations. None of this was earned. Neither Russia nor China divested their military ambitions, dispensed with their revanchism, or displaced arbitrary authoritarian rule with democracy and open markets. As their decisions to decouple from the international system compounded, as they pursued dreams of dual circulation to export boldly while curtailing access to domestic markets, as the state capitalist Belt and Road Initiative challenged democratic capitalism, democracies grew more complacent and prone to elite capture and corruption. The West's nihilistic obsession with postmodernism swelled, imbued with performative stances on issues ranging from human dignity to energy security, and an incapacity to define and confront the threat of a rising illiberal age. Russia turned to the Iranian regime for drone technologies, China for discounted energy, and as an instigator for the chaos in the West militarily and through exploiting moral equivalencies. Two lifetime rulers, undeterred by well-intentioned protestations, unbowed by democratic resolve, stood in their shared vision of their own dominance over their neighbors and the world. From their vantage at every turn over the last decade, the democratic world adhered to a pattern of half measures to conciliate, failing to make the hard decisions that would defend us against their authoritarian ambitions. In Venezuela, an unchallenged authoritarian consolidation. In Crimea and Donbass, a policy of strategic management. Between Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and ISIS, containment. In Hong Kong and Xinjiang, performative theater. Kabul, retreat. Tehran, entreaties. The democratic world's aversion to confronting authoritarians for what they are, instead of longing for a return to an elusive normal they wish they had, can be summed up in one word: appeasement. In 2 years, China has become the principal external supplier of Iran's ballistic missiles and now buys nearly 90% of its oil. But this moment is bigger than one regime's collapse. It is about the Iranian people, the millions who have suffered and the thousands who have died for freedom. It is about fulfilling the ancient promise of Cyrus the Great. To the Iranian community in Canada and around the world, this is your moment. The ancient light of your civilization now pierces through the darkness of the last 47 years. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister began with strong measures, but now wavers between strength and de-escalation. De-escalation with the regime that launches missiles at its neighbors and massacres its own people is not policy, it's appeasement. The Iranian people deserve their freedom. The region deserves peace. Canada must have the moral clarity and act on our interests to stand on the right side of history. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his excellent speech tonight. I think one of the things we're trying to do on this side of the House is make sense of what Liberals are saying and doing on this issue. And to give it the most charitable reading, they're still saying two contradictory things. On the one hand, we don't like this regime. We don't like that it's slaughtering its own people. We would like if it wasn't there. But on the other hand, they don't like the intervention. It seems like most of them don't. And it's hard to square them saying, okay, we want the regime to go, but we don't want anyone to take action to remove it. It seems to me that the Iranian community here in Canada and around the world has been clear about the fact that everything having been tried by the people, that they would like to see external support in their pursuit of change. Does the member agree? Is he hearing the same things from the community?
The honourable member for Calgary Heritage.
I thank the honourable member for his excellent question. And let me tell you, the man is on point. He knows what he's been talking about in defense of the Iranian people for a very long time. He's a true champion of our communities across Canada. They're hearing conflicted messages, 4 positions over 4 days, including from a prime minister that once said that the rules-based international order is over. Yet only days ago, he says, well, we have to uphold international law and the rules-based international order. I'm not confident the Prime Minister is clear what his own mind is. It's clear not what his government stands for, and it's clear his caucus is completely divided. And to our Iranian communities here at home, it's devastating. It's devastating at a time that they need clear leadership.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable.
The honourable member for Shefford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for his speech. Yesterday, March 8th, was International Women's Day. My colleague spoke about the Women Life Freedom movement, and this is more of a comment than a question. I would just like to pay tribute to this movement. I would like to hear what my colleague has to say about the fact that in religious regimes, often women are among the main victims. I join my honourable colleague in standing with the women of Iran and women around the world. In fact, I appreciate the fact that she took some time to honor what this is all about. You know, the Women Life Freedom movement is part of a longer Iranian story of women's suffrage. For 47 years, women in Iran have been subjugated by the clerical military dictatorship to a radical ideology that has denied them education, opportunity, a franchise in their democracy. It has denied them the freedoms that they are born into. Now, when we saw the uprisings in January 8 and 9 begin, we saw young Iranians from across the country stand up for their own freedom. And it was the women who paid the severest price. The kind of tools of repression the regime uses is brutal beyond what I can say in this chamber, and it is something that we must hold to account.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and honourable friend from Calgary Heritage. Regime change in Iran may be sought by many, but it doesn't necessarily lead to peace and prosperity for the people of Iran when it comes through an armed conflict. I recall, as he will as well, because he was in that government working with John Baird, when on June 14th, 2011, I was the only member of Parliament to vote against Canada going into bombing Libya, because I said to John Baird at the time, what about these people that we now recognize as the legitimate government of Libya? It includes people from al-Qaeda. And he famously said, we may not know the people we're now supporting, but we can be assured of one thing: they can't be as bad as Gaddafi. And the reality is we now have a failed state in Libya, and it exported a lot of arms to conflicts and terrorism around the world. Can we reflect on how we get about regime change so there's peace and stability?
The honourable member for Calgary Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her question and the offering of her wisdom. What we have seen in the wars of the last 20 years are mistakes and errors that might have been corrected had we had today's wisdom, but we don't. Today, what we have is the story of the Iranian people themselves. The Iranian people are among the most pro-Western civilizational strengths that the region has to offer, despite the occupation of the regime over 47 years over its own people. The Iranian people go back millennia to Cyrus the Great and the cylinder that is now before the United Nations, describing one of the first instances of human freedom and human dignity and religious freedom. It is that aspiration that is now piercing through the veil of this 47-year-old tyranny. And the people of Iran are at a point where they've had enough of their government. They've paid the price with rivers of blood across the streets of Tehran and across the country.
Hear, hear. Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And know that I will be sharing my time with the Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands. Tonight's debate, Mr. Speaker, is taking place at a time of deep uncertainty in the Middle East. Canada's position on the current situation is clear. We call for de-escalation, we implore all parties to show restraint, and we reaffirm that the security and sovereignty of our regional partners must be protected.
Canada has long been clear-eyed about one of the central drivers of instability in the Middle East, the actions of the Iranian regime. For decades, Iran's leadership has pursued policies that undermine regional security. The regime has supported armed proxy groups throughout the Middle East, advanced its ballistic missile capabilities, and continued activities related to uranium enrichment that raised serious concerns for the international community. In recent days, those destabilizing patterns have been on full display.
Mr. Speaker, while this crisis does have important geopolitical dimensions, we also must recognize the deeply human dimensions of the crisis. Throughout the Middle East, there are tens of thousands of Canadians living, traveling, and working. Many of them have now been swept up in a rapidly changing security situation. For our government, protecting Canadians abroad is the immediate priority. When tensions began to intensify, we activated our crisis response mechanisms. Consular agents across the region have been working tirelessly to assist Canadians looking for information, advice, and support. Global Affairs Canada has rolled out an intensified consular operation. Additional staff have been deployed throughout the region. Our diplomatic missions stepped up their consular capacity, and the Emergency Watch and Response Centre, which works 24 hours a day, has actively coordinated assistance for Canadians looking to leave dangerous areas. At the center of these efforts are various departure options. Where airspace remains open, Canada has obtained spots for Canadians on commercial flights and has also organized charter flights to allow for safe departures. For example, the Government of Canada has offered seats out of Dubai. We have also obtained seats on flights leaving Lebanon to help Canadians leave the region. These efforts are already bearing fruit. Over 900 Canadians were able to leave the region thanks to the flights and charter buses organized or facilitated by the Government of Canada. Just one charter flight allowed us to transport roughly 180 Canadians out of Dubai. Meanwhile, hundreds of other seats were reserved on commercial flights to allow Canadians to leave in the coming days. In zones where no flights are available, Canada worked with its partners to support overland departures. This includes assistance for Canadians traveling overland to neighboring countries where Canadian consular officials were there to help them continue their journey. Canadian representatives have been deployed in countries like Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkmenistan so that Canadians crossing land borders can receive immediate support, help with their documents, and support in booking a travel back to Canada. This is a complex effort, Mr. Speaker, one requiring devoted officials to work tirelessly. The closure of airspace across the Middle East, flight cancellations, and the rapidly changing security conditions have meant that evacuation operations could not follow a predictable path, but our main objective is a clear one: ensure that Canadians wishing to leave the region can do so, wherever possible, through safe departure routes. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to do all that is in our power to ensure the safety of Canadians, including by repatriating them. These are the responsibilities of a country that takes its role on the world stage seriously. These are the responsibilities that Canada will continue to fulfill with determination, diligence, and firmness. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, it has been my experience in this place that when you hear a member of the government say, our position is clear, that signals a case in which their position is not clear. I have a very simple question for the member. I hope she will answer it. I'd like to know if she wants to see the regime in Iran removed from power.
The Honourable the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for his question. The Prime Minister was obviously clear. While Canadians are throughout the Middle East, we want to ensure that they are safe. We want to make sure that the regime stops and that there is safety for all countries in the region. On my end, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad I had an opportunity to talk about the importance of protecting Canadians who are currently in the Middle East and the importance of finding ways to bring them home should they desire to come back. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes time to providing consular services during an international crisis, why does it always take Canada longer than everyone else? The Americans sent boats, allies were active, and this time, like every other time, Canada was behind. I don't just want to know whether there's an emergency plan currently. I want to know why there wasn't an emergency plan from the get-go, given the global context. Why weren't there consular officials already deployed in the region when it was clear that there was the risk of something happening, given the American buildup in the region? How come Canada had no emergency plan prior to the situation falling apart? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, know that the government is always ready to ensure that consular services are deployed in crisis situations. In this case, the Canadian government was ready to assess how many Canadians had questions and how many Canadians required support to leave the region. Safely, it must be noted. We sent additional officials to help out the ones working on the ground. Mr. Speaker, the work of our consular officials is important, and all the consular teams, both out in the field and in Canada, have been working 24 hours a day to bring Canadians home should they wish to come back.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a very simple question, but the member is not answering the question, so I'm going to ask the same question a second time. Does the member wish to see the end of the regime in Iran, yes or no? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I was clear. The Prime Minister wants to make sure that Canadians are safe when they are in the region, in the Middle East, and we also want to make sure that this regime doesn't have the capacity of sponsoring terrorism as they are currently doing. That is why Canada has designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization, and Canada is also involved in efforts to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And we have imposed more than 200 sanctions on Iranian individuals. So, as you know, we have a clear position, and that will continue to be the case. Questions and comments? We have time for a short question. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Well, when Francophones reach out to Global Affairs Canada, why is it that they are directed to Anglophone resources? Well, Mr. Speaker, in everything I've seen throughout the week has been in both languages. If my colleague has concrete examples that he can share with me, I'll be ready to have a look at those. But let it be known that we are capable, and of course we have to offer our services in both official languages. And Mr. Speaker, I will make sure that that is being done. But if my honorable colleague has examples that we can take a look at to improve consular services, we are always ready to do that. What is important is the protection and safety of Canadians when they're abroad.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleagues as well. We are having a very important debate tonight.
Since the morning of February 28th, I know from coast to coast to coast, people are scared. Canadians are praying for peace, wondering if the world is unraveling even faster, even as we've wondered since Putin invaded Ukraine 4 years ago. Is the world capable of pulling together for peace? And that is my goal tonight, to try to find some common threads, because what this must not be is purely a partisan debate. It's far too easy to point out that the Prime Minister made a mistake on February 28th in being too quick to issue a declaration that we supported bombing when it was obviously now, and it should have been obvious that day to the Prime Minister, a violation of international law. We must stand with international law, but now we are Canadians first and foremost, and around this room and through all parts of Canada, I'm sure what we most want is for our country to do the right thing. And I think if that means that we have to put partisanship to the side, s'il vous plaît, je pense que peut-être.
So please, I think we can put partisanship aside.
Maintenant.
And the debate is and should be on what we can do.
Foreign Affairs said clearly we need to move to de-escalation. She's not alone in that. I want to quote the Secretary General of the United Nations at their emergency debates of the Security Council. And of course, we know that around the table at that Security Council are some of the prime actors in avoiding peace in this conflict. But still, Secretary General Antonio Guterres says military action carries the risk of igniting a chain of events that no one can control in the most volatile region, one of the most volatile regions of the world. And he calls for the world needs a way out now, and that way is de-escalation and an immediate cessation of hostilities. How can Canada help? Can we help? Well, we do need to stop saying there is no international law. There is such a thing as international law. It's the United Nations Charter. And it's critical that Canada continually defend the fact that there is a United Nations Charter. We're wrong when we decide it's important, difficult, awkward, embarrassing to point out when the United States violates the international rule of law by, for instance, seizing the president of Venezuela. Hard to point these things out, but when we have a U.S. president that right now 60% of Canadians now see the U.S. as a threat, we really do need to insist on the United Nations Charter being observed and respected, or who will stand up for us if someday we need to remind people that the United Nations Charter defends Canada's sovereignty. We need to defend the sovereignty of even those nations we want to see regime change as quickly as possible. No one will disagree, I don't think, that the Iranian regime is a despicable and brutal regime that oppresses, suppresses, and kills its own people. But that doesn't mean that the United States and Israel had any legal grounds to go into bombing of Tehran. That was reckless, dangerous, and we will continue to see the consequences, maybe into the generations. We need now to seize the chance somehow, against the odds, of Canada playing the kind of role we're still respected in the world, play the kind of role we played long ago. Well, not that long ago. I'm thinking of Lloyd Axworthy. He was our foreign minister from 1996 to 2000, played a key role in getting the Landmines Treaty. And he's calling on this government to respect international law, to speak out, and to ensure that we're on the right side of history. For this, Mr. Speaker, it means that those of us in this room tonight take our responsibility, not just as partisans, but as human beings on a planet in peril, to put aside the obvious fun of making political points and getting partisan jabs. There hasn't been a single person speaking tonight with whom I won't agree with most of what they said. Not every word. Most of what everybody says in this room tonight is about how do we protect all of the world from an escalating conflict whose ultimate consequences could be beyond the disaster that we dare not speak its name. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I conclude.
And comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I respectfully disagree with my colleague on the issue of international law. I would put to her 3 points. First, the right of sovereignty is properly understood to be invested in the Iranian people, not in their oppressors and occupiers. Iranian people that have taken to the streets, demanded change, and been brutally slaughtered and are asking for action to protect them. Secondly, we have a responsibility to protect people who are being slaughtered by the regime that occupies them, people that have done everything they can but don't have the means to displace this regime without outside intervention. Thirdly, the member would have us go to the UN Security Council, where Russia, in the midst of its slaughter of civilians in Ukraine, could veto intervention against its ally and enabler, Iran. What does the member offer in response to these points and practically that actually helps the Iranian people get out of this?
The honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
From Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, it's not possible to rewrite the United Nations Charter from your desk from a desk in this place. It is the case that sovereign nation states are recognized for their sovereignty as nation states. The honourable member, and I will agree with him, I do myself dislike the Iranian regime, but the sovereignty of that nation does not rest in its people, unfortunately, any more than sovereignty of any nation can be determined by public opinion polls.
Resuming debate. Reprise du débat. Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotville. Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot-Acton since the last elections. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will ask a question to my colleague. Now, of course, there is a place for humanitarian assistance because the situation is extremely serious. As we speak, does the member agree that there shouldn't be one soldier who should be deployed? Honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands. Yes, thank you, my colleague of Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot-Acton. I absolutely agree. The Canadian government shouldn't support illegal wars.
For Mount Royal.
Thank you to my honourable colleague, as always, for her speech. I wanted to ask, Madam Speaker, is the honourable member then saying you have a rogue regime that promotes terrorism abroad, that threatens communities across the world, on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon, has an ally in the Security Council that would veto any action the United Nations would take against it? Is the honourable member saying that the world should then do absolutely nothing and allow that country to get a nuclear weapon and destroy the world?
For Saanich Gulf Islands.
The member for Mount Royal knows that that's absolutely not the position Greens would take. We do believe that there can be multilateral diplomatic efforts, and we have always supported that the people of Iran deserve to be protected. Unfortunately, the responsibility to protect doctrine was wrecked when Canada went along with bombing Libya till Libya became a failed state, and we destroyed the opportunity to use responsibility to protect. It's a nascent notion in international law, and we must defend it, and we should be able to use it, but only within the constraints of those things that are legal.
The honourable member for Report for Saskatchewan.
Madam Speaker, in follow-up to my previous question, the member's answer, as I understood it, was, well, we have to respect the existing recognition of sovereignty for an autocratic regime that is slaughtering its people, because apparently the UN Charter says we have to. No, I disagree with that interpretation. I think there are plenty of legal basis for believing we can and should respond, including the fact that we have been attacked. But, Madam Speaker, more fundamentally, doesn't she think we have a moral obligation to stand with the innocent, and that when we see before our eyes thousands of people being slaughtered simply for peacefully protesting, don't we have at some point a moral obligation to say that the processes at the United Nations are not working, that we will not allow Vladimir Putin to veto action, and that the moral thing, the just thing, the right thing is to stand with those people who are being slaughtered rather than look away on the basis of a legal technicality.
Honourable Member for Sandwich Go-Filings.
The United Nations Charter is not a legal technicality. If we didn't have it, this world would be in a great deal more trouble. But I do agree with the Honourable Member. We shouldn't turn away. We should never have turned away. We should not have allowed what happened in Syria to happen with Bashar al-Assad killing his people. We turned away because it was difficult. But a community of nations working together can take action, and we need to revive the doctrine of the responsibility to protect.
L'honorable député de Louis Saint-Laurent.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent Akiwenrek. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we are gathered tonight to talk about the war that's going on in the Middle East. My late father was a veteran of the Second World War, decorated with the Legion of Honor, twice wounded on the battlefield, and he always said that there was nothing more ugly in life than war. And I would ask the question why my father went to war, and my mother responded saying, "Your father did it so that you didn't have to." Well, as we speak, Madam Speaker, millions of people are living in the insecurity of a war. And my colleague referred to the great nation of Iran, the Iranian people, and we support the Iranian people who are living under Ayatollah regime for 47 years. So the Iranian people for 47 years have been oppressed under the terrible violence of the Ayatollah's regime. And we, as Canadians, in 1979-1980, we helped the Americans get out of Tehran as the Ayatollah regime was letting terrorists enter into the U.S. embassy. That's in the Canadian diplomatic history. So it's a repressive, theocratic, tyrannical regime that is ruling this country, and they are the principal source of terrorism. Yes, in their country, that is true. In the Middle East, that is the case, but across the world, even here in Canada, and I will come back to this point. My colleagues also referred to the nuclear threat, and that is also a factor we have to deal with. And because this regime is trying to build nuclear weapons, they massacre thousands of their own people because they did not share the same vision as the Ayatollah's regime. They shot down a civilian aircraft in which there were 55 Canadian citizens and 30 permanent residents. Canadians were targeted by the regime in Tehran. Also, the attacks of the 7th of October 2023, and yes, they are a threat in this country because we know from intelligence resources that there are about 700 people acting under the orders of Tehran here in our country as we speak. Aaron Cutler was not targeted, but had been previously by the regime in Tehran. Madam Speaker, in war times, we should set aside political partisanship. Madam Speaker, it's not because this happens that we need to turn a blind eye on the actions of our government, our Canadian government, because all Canadians have seen that the Prime Minister has had multiple different points of view. Initially, he was supportive of the military action by Israel and the United States. The following day, he was saying he was not giving a blank check to what's being done. And then he took a third position and he referred to the possibility of military participation. So for changes of opinion or point of view in such a short amount of time. With all due respect to the Prime Minister and to his office, we have to observe that he hasn't been clear. And in wartime, you have to be clear. So I call on the Prime Minister to rectify this. As we speak, we support the initiatives of Israel and the United States because we believe that the Ayatollah regime has to come to an end. The crimes, the massacres, and the atrocities that have been going on for more than 45 years is not fitting of such a rich civilization. That is why, Madam Speaker, we do support the military initiative, but of course we wish for the end of the hostilities. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Lac Saint-Jean. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Liberals haven't really participated that much in the debate, even though they were the ones who asked for the debate. But my question will be simple, Madam Speaker. Does my colleague realize that by supporting wholeheartedly the offensive by Donald Trump and the Israelis, and given what Donald Trump has said in terms of him wanting to pick the next regime and the next leader of Iran, do they not see that the dangers of wholeheartedly supporting this offensive? And should it not be up to the Iranians to pick their future and their political regime? That is my position. But when you support Donald Trump, you end up supporting his wish, his desire to pick Iran's next leader. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. I know he knows Mr. Aaron Cutler, and Mr. Cutler has a lot of respect for my colleague. And Mr. Cutler, as we speak, is being targeted by the tyrannical regime in Tehran, the Ayatollah regime. It's not Iran, it's the regime, rather, in Tehran and the Ayatollah regime that is doing that. Madam Speaker, there's nothing good in a war. This terrorist regime has to come to an end. Honest people should take their place to represent the Iranian people as they wish and as they have the right to. But unfortunately, this right was taken away from them 47 years ago.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wanted to take a minute to congratulate my colleague for his incredible speech and his clarity of moral conviction and our national interests. Listen, he has been a powerful voice in this Parliament for the people of Quebec, and they must be confused for what the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister have said over the past week, 4 positions over 4 days, and still no clarity tonight in tonight's Take Note debate. So I'd like to ask my friend and the honourable colleague, what do Quebecers think of these confused, equivocating, and unprincipled Liberals?
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent à Cowenrac.
Madame la Présidente, au Québec.
Madam Speaker, in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada, people are asking, where's the Prime Minister? Where is the Prime Minister in this debate? Where is the Prime Minister in this arena, the House of Commons?
Okay,
well, it's all well and good to wander around the world. It's all well and good to see him going to various parties in various countries. But the reality is today, the Prime Minister of Canada is here because millions of Canadians voted him in and they want him to act for Canada in Canada. But he's not even here in the House of Commons. The Honourable Member knows that we cannot refer to the presence or lack thereof of a member in the House. I would like to ask him to withdraw this comment. The Honourable Member for Settias Beckett Acton. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleague is talking about this desired regime change. My question is, when would this work? When has it worked in the past to have a regime change through attack? Under Obama, there was an agreement that limited Iran's nuclear capacity and that controlled their ballistic missile capacities. China was there, Russia was there, the United States were there, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, everyone was there. Iran signed, and it meant that 95% of the uranium was given up, and inspectors were able to freely visit nuclear reactors. Does that not show that diplomacy works when people put in the effort? The Honourable Member for Louis-Saint-Laurent, Akiawenhak. Absolutely, when diplomacy is well applied, it works. Canada invented the concept of the Blue Berets, for example. But we cannot rewrite history, but we can write the future. What is happening now is that we have a tyrannical regime that has, for the last 47 years, imposed a terrible diktat upon a population that does not deserve it. And yes, there are countries that are being directly threatened by the nuclear threat of the regime. But here in Canada, we have Canadians that are being threatened by hundreds of people who are throughout the country and who act for Tehran and who want to impose their laws here.
Debate, the Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to begin by reminding members from the governing party about what it is we are actually speaking about today. We're talking about the oppressive and brutal Iranian regime, the very regime that for 47 years has perpetrated atrocities on its own people and supported and wreaked havoc throughout the whole Middle East region and other places around the world. Let me just bring up a couple of examples, Madam Speaker. Justice 88 is a group that commemorates on an annual basis what happened in 1988 when this very brutal Iranian regime decided to arbitrarily murder 30,000 people they claim to be political prisoners in their prisons, right in one shot, gone. Tens of thousands of people murdered. Majid Reza Rahnavard, Madam Speaker, was a very vibrant young man who dared to speak truth to power and want democracy in his own country. Not only did they murder him, but they hung him from a crane in Tehran so that anybody driving by can see that if you dare to speak one word against the regime, you're going to hang there dead for your fellow citizens to see. Masha Amini was a 21, 22-year-old young lady who was wearing a hijab, but it wasn't to the liking of a particular IRGC monster who wanted it lowered to her eyebrows. When she questioned why, she was brutally murdered. Many members in this House stood up and made statements about Masha Amini. I want to remind the honourable members in the entire House. Flight PS 752, Madam Speaker. Another atrocious monster pushed the button, programmed the machine, pushed the button, and fired not one, but 2 missiles into a civilian airport, murdering 55 Canadians, 30 permanent residents in Canada, and a total of some 176 people, including children, Madam Speaker. This is what we are talking about when we're talking about de-escalation and diplomacy. You cannot have diplomacy with people that behave like this. These are not normal human beings, Madam Speaker. Here in Canada, Iranian communities are living in fear. Fear that someone is in our community that is going to squeal on them and something's going to happen to their families back home, or live in danger in their own homes in the communities in which we represent, and I represent a particular area of York region that is the heart of the Iranian Canadian community in Canada. Repeatedly we see these things, and yet we see a Prime Minister who has decided to be radio silent in Parliament on this issue. He has not stood in his place. He has not addressed Parliament. He has not voiced any opinion, other than when someone puts a microphone in his face wherever he is traveling around the world doing his own things. 4 different times he's changed his mind on how he sees the effort of the United States and Israel, the incursion into Iran, where basically what they're doing is trying to help the Iranian people get their country back and to have their own voice. A very inconsistent and incoherent message coming from the Prime Minister of Canada. It is unfair to Iranians. It certainly is unfair to Canadians, all Canadians, and especially Canadians in our very vibrant, dynamic Iranian community. Flip-flopping on issues like this is not advisable at best at any time, especially in this particular instance. Today I gave notice of a motion, Madam Speaker, at the Citizenship and Immigration Committee that would, amongst other things, do a few things, okay, that address, however, the abysmal record of the immigration file of this Liberal government. 7, as you know, ministers in the last 10 years. But just in a nutshell, in the interest of time, I asked to expedite the deportation of non-citizens known to be IRGC operatives and to release the name of the individual reported on February 6th, 2026, who was asked and obtained the right for his name not to be revealed, who is known to be an IRGC operative. The names of all IRGC operatives and all people threatening people in our communities in Canada, Madam Speaker, must be disclosed expeditiously so people in Canada can live safe. Iranian Canadians deserve to live in safe communities. Canadians across our nation deserve to live in safe communities. Canadians have a right to live in that safety, and it is the responsibility of this Prime Minister and this government to ensure that we support unequivocally the overthrow of the brutal Iranian regime and return the beautiful country of Iran back to its people. Thank you.
Great.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Calgary Heritage.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I remain a huge fan of your work and your stewardship in this chamber, and I'm pleased to speak before you today. In fact, I'd like to take a minute to congratulate my colleague from Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill. He has been a powerful voice for the great people of his communities. We're so honored to have him in this parliament, to be championing their cause and be such a clarion voice for their interests, their values, and their dignity. In fact, I'd like to ask the honourable member for his assessment of what his constituents are advising him of with respect to the confusion that they've seen from Liberal leaders giving 4 different messages over 4 days in the period of a week, and even tonight's Take Note debate, not having a clear sense of what the government's actual position is, must cause a great deal of grief and pain. So I'm curious what the honourable member thinks.
Great question. For Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my learned colleague for that absolutely excellent question. In fact, Madam Speaker, the community is not only the community itself, but the friends of the community have gathered in hundreds of thousands of people. Just roughly 10 days ago, 350,000 people gathered in Richmond Hill with one voice, asking for the overthrow of the regime, asking for support of the American and Israeli effort to overthrow this government. Madam Speaker, people are fed up. They're fed up because they're living in fear. They're fed up for what's happening to their families back home. Their loved ones are being taken out of their homes, beaten to death because they dared to say, we want to have a voice in how we are governed. That's what we're dealing with a brutal regime like this. With people that behave like this, you cannot have diplomacy. You cannot have de-escalation talks. They're not people to have de-escalation talks. Their way of resolving problems is by hanging people from cranes in Tehran Square, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for his speech. We've been talking a lot about this war and the government's support of certain actions. But what about the consequences here of this conflict, the consequences like inflation when we're already in uncertain economic times? So my question is he aware of the possible consequences of this conflict? Farmers and producers could suffer from this as well.
For Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Okay, I'm going to mute the... Okay, so that seems to be it for what I'm going to be streaming tonight. But
parents, a young man, taken from there, disappeared for 3 days, only for the family to be informed. I informed my friend opposite, only for the family to be informed 3 days later to go pick up his body at a specific corner on 2 streets in Tehran. When they went to find the person, their loved one, he was still had a pulse, but he was near death, Madam Speaker, with a note on him that said, if you dare take him to the hospital or dare call a doctor, we will not only kill him, but we will kill all of you as well. I find it very, very difficult to sit here and talk about what's going to happen to perhaps an economic effect on Canada, and at the same time say it doesn't matter what happens to people living in Iran because they're living there and we're living here. That's not human. I cannot participate in the discussion at that level. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de la...
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Madam Speaker. No one seems to want to answer my question on the Conservative side, but I think that's a legitimate question. Supporting an offensive, a Donald Trump military offensive, Donald Trump who said, after this, I'll choose the next regime in Iran because we're going to win the war. That's what Donald Trump said. So de facto, they are blindly supporting the American and Israeli offensive, and so they are supporting Donald Trump's will to choose the next regime in Tehran. I deeply believe that it's a bit Zionist to do so. Shouldn't there be a bit more nuance, perhaps a bit of thought?
Okay. Now we're actually ending this. So this isn't like my career. I'm not a career live streamer right now. Don't really want this to be part of my full career. But I thank you for tuning in. I just thought that it'd be good to live stream this. And yeah, I thank you for tuning in. God bless you.